2,000 years ago, while the Roman Empire was rising in the west, another power in the east was preparing to build something far greater than a palace, a fortress, or even a city. In the rugged mountains of northern China, a vision was born. A wall so long, so powerful, that it would stand as both a shield and a statement to the world. This was not just construction. It was survival. Nomadic tribes like the Xiongnu raided from the north, striking villages, burning crops, and stealing livestock. For the newly unified empire of Qin, the threat was constant. The first emperor, Qin Shi Huang, believed that only one thing could protect his fragile dynasty: a wall that would stretch across deserts, valleys, and peaks, a barrier no army could ever cross. But the Great Wall of China was never just stone and earth. It was the sweat of farmers dragged from their homes, the chains of prisoners forced into endless labor, and the cries of families torn apart. Every brick was carried by human hands. Every tower was raised by men who knew they might never see their homes again. The wall was not built in a year or even a decade. It took centuries. Generations of workers lived and died in its shadow. Some sections were made of rammed earth, beaten hard by wooden hammers until it was solid as stone. Others were carved from mountain rock or fired from brick kilns. No two parts look the same. Yet together, they formed one of the most ambitious projects in human history. Legends say that the wall is the only man-made structure visible from space. That may not be true, but the legend itself speaks to its scale, to its almost impossible vastness. It winds like a dragon across more than 13,000 miles of mountains and plains, the single longest structure ever made by human hands. But behind its glory lies tragedy. The Great Wall cost not only treasure, but lives beyond counting. Exhaustion, hunger, punishment, and the cruelty of endless labor turned it into what some call the longest cemetery on earth. This is the real story of the Great Wall. Not just of stones stacked upon stones, but of the ambition, fear, sacrifice, and resilience of a people determined to survive. Welcome to Fated History. Stay with us, because once you learn how the Great Wall was truly built, you'll never look at it the same way again. The year was 221 BC. After centuries of chaos, war, and bloodshed, China finally stood united under one ruler, Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor. He was a man of extraordinary ambition, brilliant in strategy, ruthless in punishment, and obsessed with building a legacy that would never die. His dream was not just to govern China, but to make it eternal. Yet with unity came danger. To the north, across the vast grasslands, rode the Xiongnu, fierce nomadic warriors who struck without warning. They attacked border villages, stole grain, and vanished back into the steppe before Chinese armies could respond. To Qin, these raids were more than an inconvenience. They were a direct threat to his empire's survival. He understood that walls had been built before. Regional kingdoms in ancient China had raised their own defenses, short walls of earth and stone that stretched across their borders. But these walls were scattered, disconnected, and easily breached. What Qin imagined was something far greater, a single, unbroken barrier that would snake across the northern frontier of China, a line so strong it would guard his empire for all time. In the imperial court, his ministers hesitated. The cost would be unimaginable. The labor would drain villages of farmers, soldiers, and craftsmen. But Qin's word was law. He declared that the wall must be built, no matter the sacrifice. For him, it was more than defense. It was a symbol of power. Proof that the first emperor had the strength to command mountains and rivers, to shape the earth itself into a weapon. He ordered his generals to gather men by the hundreds of thousands. Farmers were seized during planting season. Prisoners were marched in chains. Soldiers laid down their swords to carry stones. Families were torn apart as men were forced north, never to return. What had once been farmland and villages now became a living army of builders. To the emperor, the Great Wall was destiny. To the workers, it was a nightmare. But in Qin's vision, the suffering of many was justified by the immortality of one man's dream. The Great Wall began as an act of fear fear of the raiders beyond the mountains, and fear of losing the fragile unity Qin had created. But fear, when wielded by an emperor, could move armies, crush rebellions, and carve history into stone. And so, under the burning sun and the shadow of Qin's ambition, the first stones of the Great Wall were laid. The emperor's decree thundered across the land like a storm. From the fertile valleys of the Yellow River to the rugged mountains of the west, men were seized in the name of the Great Wall. It mattered little whether they were farmers tending their fields, scholars studying ancient texts, or criminals awaiting punishment. All were equal before Qin's command. All would become builders. The empire swelled with forced labor. Historians would later call them the army without weapons. Unlike soldiers, their enemy was not flesh and blood, but stone, earth, and the endless horizon. The numbers are staggering. Some records speak of 300,000 to 500,000 men conscripted, though others whisper of nearly 1 million souls. Bound not by honor, but by chains. Prisoners were marched from dungeons, their wrists scarred by iron shackles. For them, the wall was a living death sentence. Once taken, few ever returned. Farmers, too, were torn from their homes, their crops left to rot. Even scholars who had dared to question Qin's reforms were exiled to the wall, their ink-stained hands blistered and broken as they carried stone after stone. Families were shattered. Wives and children wept as fathers disappeared into the northern wilderness, swallowed by dust and silence. For those left behind, the wall was not protection. It was grief, an invisible hand reaching into every village and dragging life away. Each day, under the whip of overseers, men dug trenches, heaped soil, and packed it tight with stone and clay. The work was relentless. The seasons showed no mercy. In summer, the sun baked the desert sands until men collapsed from thirst. In winter, the icy winds of the northern steppes froze the ground so hard that pickaxes shattered like glass. The emperor's officers drove the labor forward with brutal discipline. Anyone who slowed, anyone who resisted, was beaten or executed on the spot. To Qin Shi Huang, a single life was worthless compared to the eternal endurance of his wall. The dead were not carried home. They were buried within the very foundations they built. Their bones became mortar. Their flesh became legend. And yet, despite the suffering, the wall began to rise. Stretching across mountains, deserts, and river valleys, it slithered like a serpent across the earth. It was not a single wall at first, but countless fragments, stitched together by blood and sweat. From afar, it seemed endless, an iron scar dividing civilization from chaos. To the emperor, this army of builders was proof of his absolute power. To the world, it was a wonder beyond imagination. But to the men who raised it, the Great Wall was not a monument. It was a graveyard that marched endlessly toward the horizon. The Great Wall was not only built with stone and soil, it was built with human life. Behind every towering section, behind every layer of packed earth, lay the sweat, tears, and bones of countless men who would never see their homes again. The labor was merciless. Each day began before the sun rose and ended long after it sank behind the mountains. Builders hauled stones weighing hundreds of pounds, dragging them up steep cliffs with nothing but ropes and bare hands. The jagged rocks tore through their skin, leaving trails of blood across the very foundation they raised. Food was scarce. A handful of rice, perhaps a bowl of thin gruel, that was all most workers had to survive. Water was fetched from distant rivers, often carried in buckets across blistering landscapes. Many died of thirst before they even reached the work site. Disease spread like wildfire in the crowded camps. Dysentery, fever, and malnutrition claimed more lives than the whips of the overseers. Winter was crueler still. The northern winds howled across the mountains, freezing men to the bone. Those who could not keep pace collapsed, their bodies stiff with frost. There was no ceremony for the dead. Overseers ordered their corpses buried directly into the wall. In time, legend would call it the world's longest cemetery. The punishments were harsher than the climate. Any attempt to escape, to rest, or to rebel was answered with swift brutality. Some were beaten until their bones snapped. Others were executed publicly as a warning. Fear, more than loyalty, held the army of builders together, and yet, in the shadows of suffering, there were whispers of humanity. A farmer might share his last grain of rice with a starving prisoner. A scholar, once silenced by the empire, might carve poems into stone, verses that would never be read but carried the last fragments of his dignity. These small acts of defiance became the only comfort in a world ruled by death. Still, the wall rose higher. Its ridges began to crown the mountains, its towers dotted the horizon like teeth. From afar, it appeared eternal, an unbroken line of strength. But up close its stones dripped with sorrow. Every brick was a tombstone, every rampart a reminder that the empire demanded sacrifice without end. The Great Wall was a wonder of engineering, but to the men who built it, it was a sentence. A monument carved not in honor, but in pain. Their blood soaked into the earth, binding the wall together far more tightly than any mortar ever could. To the world, the Great Wall looks like a single unbroken fortress stretching across the horizon. But in truth, it was a marvel of engineering, a living puzzle built piece by piece, region by region, using whatever the land itself could provide. The builders did not have the luxury of uniform materials. In the Rocky Mountains, they carved massive stones from cliffs, cutting and shaping them with bronze and iron tools. These heavy blocks were hauled upward using wooden sleds, pulleys, and manpower. In the deserts, where stone was scarce, they used rammed earth, layer upon layer of packed soil, clay, and gravel beaten into solid walls so dense they could last centuries. Near rivers, bricks were fired in giant kilns, their ash rising like smoke signals across the frontier. The process was grueling. Imagine rows of men with wooden rammers, pounding earth for hours until it became as hard as rock. Others stacked stones with precision, fitting each one so tightly that not even a blade of grass could pass between them. Mortar, when used, was made from lime and even rice flour, giving the wall surprising strength. The design itself was brilliant. The wall was not simply a barrier, it was a military machine. Watchtowers rose every few hundred meters, serving as eyes across the vast frontier. From these towers, soldiers lit smoke by day and fire by night, sending signals that could travel hundreds of kilometers in mere hours. Barracks were built into the wall itself, allowing garrisons to live where they guarded. At critical points, massive fortresses stood, equipped with gates that could open to unleash armies or close to choke off invaders. Every twist and turn of the wall had a purpose. It snaked over mountains, followed rivers, and carved through valleys, always seeking the most defensible ground. Where terrain gave advantage, the wall was reinforced with double layers. In some areas, it was wide enough for 5 horses to ride abreast. In others, it towered over the cliffs, an impossible obstacle for anyone daring to cross. Yet, what makes the wall truly remarkable is not just its size, but its adaptability. Built over centuries, each dynasty modified and extended it, adding new techniques, new fortifications, new lifeblood. It was less a single wall and more a living organism, constantly growing and reshaping to meet the needs of an empire under threat. The wall was never merely stone and earth. It was strategy carved into the land itself, an empire's heartbeat, pulsing across deserts and mountains. To build it was to bend nature to human will, to leave behind not just a structure, but a legacy written in stone. The Great Wall was never meant to be just a monument. It was a sword and a shield, a living weapon forged across the land to protect the empire from enemies beyond its borders. For centuries, China's greatest threat came from the nomadic tribes of the north, the Xiongnu, and later the Mongols. These warriors lived on horseback, moving swiftly across the steppes, striking villages and vanishing into the horizon. Against such an enemy, traditional armies were helpless. The wall changed everything. From its ridges, soldiers could see for miles. Watchtowers acted like the empire's eyes, scanning the plains for any sign of dust rising, a sure mark of approaching riders. When danger was spotted, a signal chain would ignite, smoke by day, fire by night. In moments, messages could travel faster than any rider, alerting fortresses hundreds of kilometers away. The wall was also a fortress in itself. Soldiers lived in barracks built directly into its body, their weapons stored in armories hidden inside the towers. Arrows, spears, and later even gunpowder weapons were stockpiled to rain destruction upon invaders. At narrow passes, the wall funneled enemies into kill zones where Chinese troops could strike from above. In many areas, the top of the wall was wide enough to allow troops and cavalry to march along its spine, turning it into a highway of war. Psychology was as important as stone. To nomadic raiders, the sight of the wall was intimidating, an endless barrier rising from the earth, declaring that the empire was untouchable. It was not just defense, it was a message. Here lies China. Beyond this line, you will not pass. But the wall was not impenetrable. History records moments when enemies breached it, bribing gatekeepers or storming weak sections. Yet even then, it slowed them, drained their strength, and bought the empire precious time. It was not perfection, but it was enough to keep China's heartland alive. For centuries, dynasties used the wall as both shield and stage. Troops paraded along it, emperors inspected it, and poets praised it. To the Chinese people, it became more than stone. It was identity, a reminder that their civilization was worth protecting at any cost. The Great Wall was the longest weapon ever built by human hands, not forged of steel, but of earth, sweat, and stone. And while swords rust and arrows break, the wall endured, silent, eternal, always watching the horizon. Centuries have passed since the first stones of the Great Wall were laid. Dynasties rose and fell, emperors died, and wars raged. But the wall endured, stretching silently across deserts, rivers, and mountains like a scar carved into the earth. Today, it is celebrated as one of the greatest achievements in human history. But behind its grandeur lies a dual legacy, one of glory and one of suffering. On the one hand, the wall became a symbol of China's strength. It represented unity, the ability of a people to bend nature to their will and defend their civilization against the chaos beyond. Emperors saw it as proof of their divine mandate, proof that they alone could protect the realm. To the people who lived within its shadow, it was both a shield and a monument of pride. Yet, on the other hand, the wall was built on sacrifice. For every emperor who admired its strength, there were countless laborers whose bones lie hidden within its foundations. Legends tell of husbands who never returned, of mothers who wept as their sons were taken, of children left fatherless because the empire demanded brick and stone above all else. One of the most famous stories is that of Ming Dynasty, a woman whose husband perished while building the wall. Her tears, legend says, were so powerful that they caused a section of the wall to collapse, revealing his remains. It is a myth, but like all myths, it holds a deeper truth. The wall was never only about protection, but about loss. Over time, dynasties abandoned parts of it. Invaders breached it, and empires crumbled despite it. And yet, the wall never truly failed. Even in ruin, even in silence, it became a reminder that human ambition has no limits, and that every wonder of the world comes with a price. Today, millions walk along its restored sections. They take pictures, trace their hands along its stones, and marvel at its vastness. Few stop to think of the countless lives buried within. Few remember that this monument was once a battlefield, a graveyard, and a prison. The Great Wall is more than stone. It is memory, it is myth, it is history, written not in ink, but in sweat and blood. And as long as it stands, it whispers the same message across the winds of time. Greatness is never free. And so, the Great Wall of China still stands, a monument of stone, of blood, and of sacrifice. For some, it is a wonder. For others, it is a graveyard. But for all of us, it is a reminder of what humanity can achieve and what humanity can lose. If you've journeyed with us through this story, remember, history is never just dates and names. It is life, it is death, it is memory carved into the earth. This was Fated History. If you want more untold stories like this, stories that reveal the raw truth behind the world's greatest wonders, subscribe now and let history fade into your memory forever.